We have a great opportunity to have a live in the studio of N1, Karen Pierce, ex-UK ambassador to US and now special envoy for the Western Balkans.
Thank you.
Pierce, thank you for joining us in N1 program.
Thank you.
With the fact that there is a very dangerous and challenging time, how that fact, that issue of Western Balkan has remained, seems like in the shadow in terms of the global crisis such as Ukraine, Middle East and the new presidency of Donald Trump time.
I think you're right. Globally, it's a time of increased uncertainty and unprecedented in its unpredictability. But the Western Balkans are central to the question of stability and security in Europe. As the United Kingdom, we want to show our renewed interest in the region. We will also chair the Berlin process later this year, where we hope to help the countries of the region cooperate among themselves on public policy. But you're right, there are some interesting and challenging legacy issues left over from the conflicts in this region, and we would like to be instrumental in trying to help the countries come to terms with that legacy and move forward as modern European states within a modern Europe.
In the whole region there was a quite interesting time, because you know some countries like Slovenia and Croatia has already joined to NATO and EU, but some other countries are still on the waiting or negotiating process. Is there any plans or deadlines for the Western Balkan countries to join to EU and NATO?
So 3 Western Balkans countries are already in NATO, alongside, as you say, Croatia and Slovenia, who joined long ago, Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro are in NATO, which is excellent. And all the countries of the region have candidate status with the European Union. But the European Union accession process is very technical, and countries have to move along a path, closing various chapters as they go. I think we see our role, we're no longer in the European Union, but we see our role as responding to that desire of citizens of the Western Balkans to join the EU, and we will help them do that, and we will help them make progress on the issues that underpin the accession process. Some of that's reconciliation, some of it is economic, some of it's about good governance, and we're ready to be helpful on those issues.
You just been recently traveled to Bosnia, if I'm right, and you know many said that that political crisis is particularly worrying in the Bosnia and Herzegovina. Who is the most responsible for it? Do you think that there is some specific dangerous threat that should be addressed in the recent time?
Well, it's, as you know, the 30th anniversary of Srebrenica, the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Agreement, and along with the foreign minister here, I was at the Dayton commemorations in Ohio a couple of weeks ago, and I think there's a general feeling that Bosnia and Herzegovina is fragile still. It's particularly fragile, I'm sorry to say, because of the actions of Mr. Dodik in Republika Srpska. He is not doing Bosnian Serb citizens a service by his approach. He's trying to undermine the very existence of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a state with his secessionist legislation. We absolutely uphold the Dayton criteria: 1 state, 2 entities, 3 constituent peoples. That's very important, and I know the issue of the election law has been particularly concerning for Bosnian Croat citizens, and we're very ready to talk about that. But for Bosnia and Herzegovina to make progress with NATO and with the European Union, it has to do so as a state, which means that we have to help Bosnia and Herzegovina along that path. And Mr. Dodik is pulling in the opposite direction and helping nobody in the process.
That's something that people from Bosnia is very keen to thinking what's the future for the Bosnia in that terms when the country is still very fragile. Could you imagine that there will be any kind of intervention from the society, from the international community in any terms of unrest or any terms of some kind of conflict in Bosnia? Would United States and allies and European Union stand up and try to prevent any kind of conflict in the country?
I think it's in all our interests, and it's all our aim not to let Bosnia and Herzegovina return to the awful violence that we saw 30 years ago and more, and periodically have seen in the Western Balkans since. I'm thinking of the Kosovo conflict. Those particular incidents were caused by people who perpetrated war crimes, have been found guilty, have been jailed in many cases, or have since died. It shouldn't be the case that the whole of Serbia, for example, is held responsible for the crimes of Milosevic. But nevertheless, that legacy does persist. We hope very much it won't come to a return to fighting, but I support very much having EUFOR on the ground, the European force there. There is a high representative, as you know, under Dayton, so if you like, the international community is already very heavily engaged in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is a unique case in that sense. No other country in the world has a structure like the High Representative. The UN has a slightly different structure. So I would hope that between us, we could help all the parties in Bosnia to calm tensions if tensions arose. But I want to stress we're not expecting violence. There are a great preponderance of weapons there. One always has to watch that very carefully. But we would appeal to all the political leaders to do what is in the best interest of all the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, pass the legislation needed so that Bosnia and Herzegovina can make progress towards the EU.
How do you see the role of a High Representative in Bosnia and his latest decision, which, you know, having a lot of, you know, impact, especially on the Bosnian and the Serbian part of the Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, we support the High Representative. He's a very fine public servant. He's provided for in the Dayton peace agreement, and I would just recall that peace agreement is backed by a Chapter 7 Security Council resolution. So it is mandatory, and the High Representative under Dayton is the final authority in the country for whatever happens on the civilian side. And I think people forget that. There are some mischievous, vexatious statements from Russia that are designed to confuse the picture, but we all signed up to this authority from the High Representative. And what his job is to keep the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina functioning in a way that benefits all three constituent peoples and the other communities in the country. And that's what he does. And the challenge comes because Mr. Dodik doesn't want to accept his authority, challenges the authority, challenges the Constitutional Court. No one can be above the law. Mr. Dodik should repeal his secessionist legislation, and he should get back into compliance with the rulings made by the court and the High Representative.
Let's move to Serbia, because, you know, students and civil protests have been going on in Serbia for the last 6 months or so. How do you see that situation and position of the especially free media and democracy in the country that has some kind of ties with Russia, especially when president of the country is one of the real European president who's traveling to Moscow and celebrating with President Putin?
Well, I do want to say that we have no animosity in this towards the Russian people. The Red Army liberated Belgrade in the Second World War. We understand that there's a very deep historical connection. We look at Russian actions, particularly the actions of the Russian government. And what they're doing in the Western Balkans simply isn't helpful. There's a lot of meddling, there's a lot of disinformation coming out, whereas I remember during Dayton, the Russians were trying to be constructive, and we managed to get the peace agreement. It would be very good to have everybody on the same page to keep all the countries of the Western Balkans stable and secure. I don't want to comment on the protests in Serbia. I don't want to look as if I'm interfering in Serbian domestic politics, but what I would say is that there is a case for reform in many of the countries in terms of the way they do governance and in terms of the representative nature of their democracies, and certainly in terms of a free and independent press. And we support freedom of the press, obviously. We work very closely with independent journalists. It's vital, not least because of the Russian disinformation, that journalists like yourself, like your counterparts in the region, can report freely and fairly without interference. It's also vital that public protests can take place as long as they do so without violence.
Is it acceptable for the international community in UK that our colleagues from N1 in Belgrade has been targeting from the state media and from the government? Is that something that is absolutely acceptable for Europe and for the West, that there is no free media, there is very questionable the position of some non-government institutions? And is it something that international community has doubt about what's going on, and have chance to actually put the message that in the Serbia who wants to join the EU, something is wrong, it's not acceptable at the moment?
I think all attacks on independent journalists are not acceptable. This has been not this particular incident, and I don't have any knowledge of your N1 colleagues, I'm afraid to say, but attacks on independent journalists are not acceptable. We've said so in the Security Council, we've said so in Europe, in NATO, and elsewhere, and you're right. It's not compatible with a country's aspirations to join the European Union. And we would just appeal to all political leaders in the Western Balkans countries to see a free and independent media as part and parcel of the reforms that need to come so that they can modernise and join the European Union. I stress that this is what their citizens want. It's not something we're imposing. We've left the European Union, but their citizens want to join the European Union, and therefore, as the United Kingdom, we're ready to help that aim.
There is another question that is, worrying, and that's the situation in Kosovo, and that issue is sometimes fueling, not just, the hate speech, but sometimes the, worrying that some, conflict might be also, broke up in that moment. How do you think, how do you assess, that situation, an issue of autonomy and independence of Kosovo that Serbia does not recognize?
Well, as you know, this has been a problem for very many years. There was the effort by the UN and Ahtisaari, and a very fine American diplomat, Frank Wisner, who sadly died recently, whose memorial was held at the same time as the Dayton commemoration, coincidentally. And this was designed to give Kosovo independence and a path to help it modernise and become a normal state. We badly need to see normalisation between Serbia and Kosovo. I'm sorry to say that neither side is sticking to the commitments they made in 2023. And for our part, we stand ready to help them make progress in normalisation. The EU are playing a very critical role in that. There's a very fine representative on the ground, Peter Sorensen. There's the High Representative, Callas. We are all trying to help them get back together into a much more cooperative spirit that would eventually see Serbia recognise Kosovo's place, at least in international organisations. But part of that means that Kosovo has to do more to make the Kosovo Serb community, particularly in the north, feel part and parcel of the whole country. They have to govern for all communities throughout Kosovo, not just for one community. And they have to implement the commitments that they have signed up to.
Your perspective is really interesting. You coming, right now as an ex-ambassador from the US, you've been at that time, and as the UK being part of the European Union has a lot of knowledge about the European Union. Now the UK has some kind of special, place in the international community. From all those perspectives, how do you see that meeting that you mentioned, summit of leaders of the Western Balkan countries in London? What do you really and truly expect from that summit?
Well, thank you for those kind words about the UK. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is very much a leader in the current crises on Ukraine, as you know. He's been working very closely with President Macron and now Chancellor Merz, and very willing to try and work with the Americans and bring about an eventual peaceful settlement in Ukraine. For the Western Balkans, the Prime Minister wanted to host the Berlin process because he wanted to send a signal that although the United Kingdom has left the European Union, we are still deeply interested and connected to what happens in Europe. In many ways, the Western Balkans is unfinished business. We referred earlier to the countries that have got in the European Union. It remains for these 6 to make progress, and we want to use the Berlin process to help foster cooperation across migration and organised crime, across security, and across economic partnerships. And we'll be looking at measures to try and move those agendas along. We also want the countries to actually implement the commitments they've made in previous Berlin process summits, and the Prime Minister will want to focus on that in particular.
Thank you very much for your valuable opinions and views. Thank you very much for being guest on N1. Thank you, Karen Pierce.
Thank you very much.